Hey there, everybody, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum, the horror movie podcast that covers all of the franchises, one movie and one episode at a time. As always, I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and joining me today in the co-host chair from Bloody Disgusting, Man of Valum, as well as formerly the Movies for Life podcast, and our classic horror guru, Mr. Brian Kuiper. Brian, how are we tonight?
Doing good, visiting a pretty fun movie, I thought.
I thought so too, man. This was like a real pleasure to watch. Like nice tight 80 minutes. You see that 80-minute mark and then you think like, man, Terrifier 3, 2 hours and 6 minutes.
Right.
Coming up, when you're like, we used to be a country. We used to be able to get things done.
Well, it is shorter than the second one.
Yeah,
2 hours.
That's true. It is
2 hours and 20
Yeah,
minutes.
I like Terrifier 3. I think it's premiering at Fantastic Fest.
Yeah,
and I'm going to be there.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, oh man, maybe I'll get to see it. But I know the way the ticketing works there. Like, there's not a chance in hell that I'm going to get to see Terrifier 3, but I don't know. Fingers crossed that I get in.
Well, you wouldn't have to wait
too
much longer after that, at least, probably.
No, like the 11th, right? October 11th?
Yeah.
So, but we'll talk about that in a little bit in the what's coming up. But we are here today to talk about a really fun B movie for sure. B horror movie for sure. But like light, breezy, not a lot of meat on the bone, but a lot of fun to kind of watch. We're here to talk about 1959's Return of the Fly. And before we do that, before we kind of get into our initial thoughts and such, just a little bit of housekeeping to let listeners know what's going on. It's been kind of a hectic summer for me, which is odd because I take so much time off in the summer, but different like travel and running my own little side business and getting another show up and running. It's been a little bit of a hectic summer, so we've like the schedule's gone like kind of been a little bit hit or miss here or there. So what we have coming up, we have all the Fly episodes, and then heading into October, I know we're going to be covering Terrifier as our main franchise for 3 episodes, but there's also going to be a new VHS movie, VHS Beyond. And I believe we're going to be covering that as well. Is just to nip all our VHS stuff up, and also we still got to do Alien Romulus. Like, we weren't able to get enough of us on a panel to do that, and I am really jonesing to talk about that movie.
Yeah, I actually would. I think I must have. I don't know. I must have thought, I guess we're not doing it. I could have probably jumped in to talk about that one too, because that's I just missed it in the Slack probably, in the midst of all the craziness.
And I think I threw it out there a couple times, and I know that we all have like a ton of stuff going on.
Yeah.
So, and it's the end of the summer, so I'm like, I'm not going to push it. We can wait a little bit. But I've listened to probably, including if you want to hear some great Alien Romulus talk right now, like one of our co-hosts, the Mr. Devon Taylor on his main gig Spectre Cinema Club, like just did a fantastic episode on Romulus along with his co-host Garrett, like a really fun listen.
Cool.
So Gauntlet is thrown down, but there's been a few like really good shows that have covered it, and I'm just like jonesing to talk about that movie. So that will be coming up probably September, October. We'll look at when it comes out on digital and then see when there's like a week in between, and we'll get a few of us on to definitely talk about that. And I do have like another guest in mind because second time went down easier for me on that movie.
Oh, yeah?
I still have some quibbles.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then for our patrons, Ari's I Spit on Your Grave, episode 0 is up. Episode 1 on the first movie is ready to go. I'm going to schedule that for early September. We're a bit behind on recording Trap, so I think we'll try to drop 2 more episodes into September's feed for the patrons, since I'm a little bit behind this month. We'll figure something out to get an extra one up there, with Trap being one of them. Another like fun B movie to talk about.
Yeah.
So just wanted to throw some of the housekeeping out there early, and then come fall, I think we'll get back to our normal like day and time that we record, which I think will be easier for everyone. Typically we record on Saturdays, but I don't know about you, Brian, like Saturday, early afternoon, I think a lot of folks, we just want to go to the beach.
Sure.
The fun park. Yeah.
Sure.
Enjoy some sunshine.
Well, frankly, it's morning for me, so it's like perfect. You guys are early afternoon, and I'm like, hey, it's still morning, so I'm great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would get up super early and record. Like if I got up at did it at 10, I don't know how you'd feel about being like 7 a.m.
I'm up. I mean, I get up early every day. So yeah.
For my other show, my co-host is across the pond, 5 hours ahead, and sometimes trying to make the recordings work. We don't always know what time is what, so we sometimes cross paths when we have a recording date set. So time zones are fun, people. Anyway, we're not here to talk about time zones. We're here to talk about Edward Burns' Return of the Fly, starring the wonderful Vincent Price. And Brian, what are your initial thoughts on this movie? Like, I imagine this was one that you had seen before or had quite some familiarity with heading into this episode.
Actually, this was a first-time watch for me, which is a little bit strange because I mentioned last time the book Movie Monsters, Thomas G. Aylesworth, and it's got a chapter on The Fly, and the picture in there is from Return of the Fly. So my first exposure to actually seeing an image of The Fly was actually from this movie. So I knew of it. I knew that image. I knew that better than the original, as far as just my familiarity with some of the imagery of it. And so I think I was kind of expecting out of the original Fly this movie. I was expecting more like this, where it's a little bit, guy turns into a fly and it's crazy and there's a chase scene and there's monsters, big giant thing, that kind of thing. Whereas the original Fly is much more psychological. I mean, that's, it's got a lot of sort of thematic depth that this one doesn't really have, which I'm okay with. Yeah, it's not a problem. I actually think I like Vincent Price better in this movie. I think he's in the first movie. I feel like he's almost miscast. He's just kind of stiff and earnest and just like he doesn't know what to do with his hands or something. I don't know. That's almost how it feels. It's weird because I love Vincent Price, and here he gets to be a little bit more. He's not a bad guy by any stretch, but he has a little bit more of the edge that we're used to with Vincent Price. When you get into the William Castle and the Roger Corman movies, even whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, there's a little bit of edge to him. And I think he brings that here. And I really enjoyed that. I love the sort of gangster quality to it. I mean, the what is he, a mortician? He's basically dressed like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. Kind of has that feel to it. And I love that there's a pretty legitimately, mustache twirling villain in this movie. And it's a lot of fun. It's got some really kind of cool grotesqueries to it that we'll talk about later. I just like the weirdness of it. It's really just a fun. It's what I look for in a 50s B science fiction movie.
It feels like the very definition of a drive-in movie.
Yes.
It just has that feel. Like, this is by no means a prestige picture. It's by no means like an A-list or A-reel type of picture. But it feels like something that you would program in like drive-in theaters across America, and teenagers on dates, in between making out with one another would, see the giant fly monster and throw their popcorn in the air and scream a little bit, or have a good laugh at some of the stuff that's going on screen. And I mean that in like a kind and affectionate way, but it's very much like in terms of the overall quality of compared to the first film, like it's a marked step down, but it's not poorly done. It's just like you have less tools at your disposal, but you make good use of those tools.
Yeah, I mean, I was struggling with how I felt about it a little bit because I think you put it well there, because I was like, I don't think that it's necessarily a better movie than The Fly, but I would rather watch this. I was more entertained by this one. So,
because we talked about that first movie, and I had kind of or I had kind of brought up the point that it takes a long time to get going. Like it's an hour and 40 minutes long, and you're close to that hour mark before you are introduced to the Fly.
Yep.
It's a lot of build up. They spend a lot of time on Andre and Helene's romance and their love for one another, and it's kind of why it's framed the way it is, where it's framed around like we already know there's been a murder at the start of the movie or a death at the start of the movie, and although we don't see it, we know it's pretty grisly, like someone has been pressed to death in that printing press.
Yeah, it's pretty bloody opening even for a 58 movie, you know.
And you almost need that, otherwise it would feel too much like a period drama in a science fiction horror movie. And even when the Fly is revealed, a lot of it is just the pathos of what Andre is going through. Like, he's not doing anything horrific. You never get the sense that Helene is in any danger in that movie. Like, it's not really a monster movie. It's more, like you said, a psychological drama than it is like a horror movie. Really the scariest thing in that movie, I think, is that last scene where you have the Fly with the Andre head and the spider bearing down on it. Like, that to me is the nightmare fuel of that movie. Like, that whole scene to me is really terrifying. I could see that scaring the crap out of audiences back in 58.
Absolutely.
Where, you know, this one, like the last third of the movie, which to me is the weakest part of the movie, but the last third of the movie is a straight up monster movie.
Yep.
And the first 50 minutes of this, and it's a breezy 82 minutes with credit runtime, super breezy. The first 51 minutes of this movie is pretty solid, like crime drama, almost a film noir in a lot of ways. And it's pretty compelling, and it moves really quick. And like you said, like Vincent Price has a little bit more to do. He's a little bit more established at this point. He's getting top billing. He's getting paid for his efforts too. Like, he's collecting a pretty handsome check.
Yep.
And I think also, although he's not I spent a lot of time making fun of like the kid who played Philippe in the first one, you know?
Right.
But I think that like Philippe's story here is fairly compelling. And I really like the performance as well. So
there's just a lot to like and just kind of have fun with more than anything. That's my feeling watching it, is it's fun. It's a little bit of I'm a big fan of Joe Dante's movie Matinee, which I know is sort of poking fun at the Mant movie is sort of poking fun at radioactive bug movies of the 50s, and but in a way it's kind of William Castle didn't really make human bug or big bug movies. His were ghost movies and things like that. So it's really like he's sort of looking at a movie like this, sort of poking fun at a movie like this, because this is what people think of when they think of 50s. I mean, if you think of 50s sci-fi horror, you think of something like Return of the Fly, them and things like that. I mentioned them a lot just because I revisited it recently, but even even this movie is not like the typical 50s sci-fi movie. You had a lot of giant insects, you had a lot of alien invaders, but you didn't necessarily have, humans turning into bugs all the time.
Right.
So there are just a few, and this is sort of like the quintessential. I think this is quintessentially what people think of when they think, 50s sci-fi horror. And if they haven't seen a whole lot of it, they probably latch on to this kind of a movie.
Agree. I think it fits very much in that mold where almost if you were to put on the original Fly and show that at a kind of like 50 side, it's almost like this, it wouldn't seem to fit in. It almost would kind of like drag. I think it's an excellent made movie, and it's like there's a lot of like rich things to chew on with it.
Yeah.
But it would almost like drag the tempo if you're programming something to the taste of like the 50s, like science fiction aficionado. They're going to be like almost like this almost doesn't fit in some ways.
Yeah.
Or this one does.
Yeah.
So let's talk briefly about there's some background nuggets here. I've just got a little bit to talk about here. We don't have as much as we did with like the first movie, because this is really a, we kid around about the Halloween sequels and the Friday the 13th sequels, or you get to something like The Howling. The movie's getting like churned out where you have like a solid first effort that has a lot of love and care that's put into it, and then immediately have something turn around right away.
Right.
Where it's like, all right, we'll just slap the name on it and the audiences will come pick it up. Like, we're going to grab our cash before the audiences get hip to what we're trying to do here.
Sure. Yeah, I think the Howling. I've only ever seen the first one, which I love. It's one of my favorite horror movies, period. And I saw the second one once, and I was like, I know people like this movie, but I don't get it.
You don't get the love for it.
Yeah,
I think it's the subtitle for it. That
your sister's a werewolf. I mean, I think you can. I can launch. I mean, I think two reasons why it's popular. Sybil Danning's left breast and Sybil Danning's right breast, and Christopher Lee's in it too. But it's just
now, were Christopher Lee's breasts in it?
That's what I want to know.
Christopher Lee.
That's what I really want to know.
Topless in that movie. So, with the success of the original Fly, unfortunately, director Kurt Newman, like, he wouldn't even live to see the success of that movie, as he passed away, like, I believe a month before its premiere. And that would be, we talked a little bit about him last time around. Like, he was a prolific B-movie director, doing a lot of Westerns, doing a lot of Tarzan movies. This would have been kind of like a step up for him, like a bigger budget, a little bit nicer look to it. And he, the investment that Fox made in him and in the picture, it paid off. Like, it's a solid hit. They elevated it from like the B-movie assembly line of Regal, where you would have maybe made it for like $90,000, I think is what we said the budget on most of those were. And it got closer to like $500,000 for a budget. And it brought back in between $3 and $4 million in theater rentals. So it made between 6 and 8 times its original budget, which is a really good return on investment. At a time when like there's not blockbuster movies, like you're not like, that seems like chump change now, but that's kind of what films did back then. Like they would do 8 to 10 times their budget, and that would still only be like, if a movie did $10 million, like, whoa, like that would have been like their equivalent of Jaws at that point.
Sure. Well, I mean, and at the time, just the way movies were exhibited was so different. I mean, you go in, pay for a ticket, and just spend all day there. You didn't have to leave after the show was over. You saw a double feature and a cartoon and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could just hang out and watch it all again if you wanted. So.
Yeah. And it wasn't like there were huge premieres. It wasn't like, hey, circle the calendar on August 30th. Yeah. Like, Afraid is coming out.
Right.
Everybody gather around for that. It was like, no, you would open up in a few cities,
Yeah.
and then a few more,
Yeah.
and then a few more, and
movies
would play for a hell of a long time.
Yeah, there were. That's right. You're right. There was sort of the regional release model of the period, and a movie like this certainly wouldn't, like The Fly, certainly wouldn't get like a big Hollywood premiere. It's not Gone with the Wind with the searchlights and everything like that.
Yeah.
It would just go by word of mouth and by, how many Fox theaters are playing this movie at this time. Oh, I guess by then that monopoly was probably broken, but it was just a different way of seeing movies.
Yeah. Well, I think too, when you talk about the box office it brought in, it doesn't necessarily mean like how many tickets were sold times X amount of dollars or cents per ticket. Whereas now, when you hear like Alien Romulus has crossed over like $100 million, you can figure like, oh, probably about 10 million people have paid to go see that.
Sure.
If the average ticket price is $10.
Right.
Where when they talk about like theater rentals, that's more, hey, X theater in Kansas City, Missouri, we're going to pay to rent a print of The Fly for X amount of weeks.
Yeah.
And then, whatever box office it generates from there, like, or the ticket the theater is going to keep. So it's not like you're really paying for the studio or a division of, tickets. We sold 100 tickets. They were $1 each. Studio gets 80. Theater gets 20. It's like, nope. It's almost like Blockbuster for theaters.
Yeah.
I mean, for lack of a better term. Like the theater is just renting the print from the studio, and however many theaters rent it out, like that's where that 3 and 4 million comes from.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, solid profit for what was supposed to be a quick and easy, churn it out in a week, get it out there on the drive-in circuit, pair it with something else, and call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
So Fox, 20th Century Fox, which at the time, like, they were really struggling. They were in a lot of financial straits. They were interested in making a sequel and the money that would bring in, but they didn't really want to make the sequel themselves. They're like, if we only have a limited amount of resources, we don't really want to allocate it to something like The Return of the Fly. So they ended up going back to the man who brought the original Fly to them initially, the King of the Bees that we talked about, Robert Lippert. And Lippert at the time was a producer and the unofficial head of Regal Pictures. He had actually already paid for some of the rights for future pictures of The Fly in advance, which is pretty shrewd.
Yeah.
And you think this is a time that like sequels aren't really a thing.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. That's, we obviously, having talked about the Frankenstein thing, the amount of time between those movies was a lot more. I mean, there was usually like, okay, we'll do one sequel maybe. It wasn't like a franchise kind of thing.
It's really not until you get to the 70s when The Godfather is a massive hit. It's like, okay, well, now we're going to do The Godfather 2. Then Jaws is a massive hit.
Yeah.
Then you have Jaws 2 3 years later. Yeah. Star Wars is like, now you're talking not tens of millions of dollars, but movies making $100 million for the first time. Like Rocky, no one would imagine like Rocky was going to become, a franchise that had like 6 entries and then 3 pictures for the Creed.
Sure.
Franchise as a spin-off of that. Like nobody would have thought when that movie came out, oh yeah, like we're going to be churning these, like churning them out to such a degree that other films are going to like poke fun of how many sequels there are to this franchise. Like that's just not something that's going on back then.
Yeah.
So Lippert had some of the rights, although by the time Cronenberg's remake rolls around, like Fox had gotten their hands on the full rights to make these movies again. And they hired director Edward Burns to direct this film. Again, another kind of journeyman director. When you look at his credits, like tons of Westerns, tons of like movies like Queen of Outer Space and High School Hellcats and Escape from Red Rock, like
Sure.
these. But what jumped out to me is he's at some point, like at the end of his career, not too long after this, he wound up being a director for the Three Stooges, where by the time Curly Howard had passed and Shemp Howard had passed, so I think this is the Curly Joe phase, when they're not doing short films anymore. They're actually doing color pictures.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. They are not worth watching. They are not worth checking out.
I don't think I've seen any of the color ones.
You don't want to. You don't want to watch that. It's almost sad.
Yeah, I'm sure.
As a lifelong Three Stooges fan, and it's someone as a kid who had like Three Stooges like script books. Like they would publish a bunch of the scripts. Like, and my dad would like pick me those up because we just grew up on the Stooges. Burns would direct two of their features, the Three Stooges Meet Hercules, and then the Three Stooges in Orbit, both of those coming out in 1962, if that gives you any indication of like how quick they're churning them out of the quality.
Yeah.
And then there was the animated there's the animated cartoon, the animated show, The New Three Stooges, that he was the director of, and it says 197 episodes. I don't know if he directed. Well, he's credited as director for pretty much like everyone I can get my look up right now. So he churned out like 197 episodes of this animated cartoon with the Three Stooges. So your mileage will vary on terms of,
I'm sure,
what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
And Burns had a pretty casual outlook. He had a pretty good outlook on like why he was chosen and why this picture was picked up. He's like, simple reason for Fox entrusting Limpert with the picture rather than Fox doing it, saying Fox was short on money, they were struggling financially, and they wanted a quick profit with as little financial risk as possible.
Yeah.
So kind of like very low risk for them with an upside for a pretty high reward.
And that kind of remained the case for 20th Century Fox a lot. Star Wars was kind of like, okay, we're going to make this $10 million movie, and it's probably not going to go anywhere. And then it'll pay the bills, and then it end up saving the company for another period of time.
And there are stories of like the bean counters, like being out on set, and the guys from ILM like running around in like the cantina scene masks, like just complete wild men, and like the executives from Fox horrified. Yeah, like they're like, we are going to lose every penny that we've sunk into this movie. Like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Which is why Lucas was able to do things like secure 100% of the toy rights. Right. Because Fox would see, like, who's going to want to buy a toy of this garbage? Like, toy rights, do what you want, whatever. Yeah. And that became so many more times lucrative than the film themselves. To the point where that first Christmas, Kenner is selling empty boxes with an IOU in them. Yep. And, like, look, we'll get to Star Wars one day. Like, we'll do a whole patron thing on Star Wars.
I would be down for the original trilogy. I still... I don't know. I cannot separate myself from my love of those first three,
Sure. Yeah. So I would say I remember seeing, we're getting a little sidetracked. Yeah. You can always tell like the quality of the movie by how sidetracked I get during this part of the show. Sure. Like how, if it's like Cronenberg's The Fly, like we're just locked in. Right. Like, all right, we're going here. But, a little loosey-goosey with this one. I remember seeing The Phantom Menace 4 times that first day.
Oh, wow.
We had taken the day out of work, all of our friends, we all worked together, and we actually had to go to different theaters to see it because we weren't able to get, tickets like to subsequent screenings in the same theater. So we would literally saw it twice in one theater, drove 30 minutes away, saw it 2 more times in another. And I remember like convincing myself that I love this movie,
Sure.
Phantom Menace. Like it's really good. I really love it. You know,
I saw it
Duel of the Fates.
I saw it 8 times theatrically when I, perspectives
and then I'm
change.
sure I went. Yeah, I'm sure I went through my like these movies are awful. They ruined my childhood phase. I'm sure I went through that. I think what brought me around in the prequels is like watching them with my kids for the first time and realizing, oh yeah, these are movies for 8-year-olds.
That's right.
Like, you're not supposed to be 40-something years old and make Star Wars like your lifestyle. Like that's actually an unhealthy thing to do.
Absolutely.
So I think, like, you know, at that point when she's like, Jar Jar Binks is great, I'm not going to say, like, I have no child.
Right, of course.
Of course. You up at this point. Like, you are being written out of the will as we speak. It's like, no, it's like, yeah, these are movies for kids.
Well, I was, after all the hate that the prequels got, I always kind of defended them a little bit, at least. And, you know, but I was always like, oh, the original trilogy is where it's at for me. And then, but my son, you know, he latched on to the prequels, you know, and so his favorite is Revenge of the Sith. Great. And so, and then my daughter, when things kind of, we went and saw the new trilogy, and she was able to, when she was littler, you know, latch on to the character of Rey. Having a central character that's a woman meant a lot to her, you know, even though she wasn't huge on, you know, Star Wars overall. So I think that, honestly, I think we're going to find ourselves in another, you know, 10, 20 years, people saying, you know, the love for the Disney era trilogy is going to come to the surface, you know. It's just the way these things seem to work.
So that's a sneak peek into our eventual
there we go
exclusive, like how we'll be talking about those. But at the time of this, the writer of the original Fly, James Clerval, he had made some noise that he wanted to step behind the camera and direct the sequel. And he actually felt slighted when he was passed over. I think Burns spoke in some interviews saying, like, we didn't have an unfriendly relationship, but he felt like Clerval was very cold towards him.
Sure.
And he attributed that to him getting the job and Clerval not getting it. Although Clerval would eventually make his own directing debut with, like, To Sir with Love.
Okay.
So, you know, the man has some chops. And Brian, you mentioned last week, you know, he became a best-selling novelist with the novel Shogun.
Yeah. And he has like a whole series. They're not like sequelized, but they're like novels that are set, I think mostly Asian set. And I don't know. It's just, he has a bunch of those. I have a handful of them.
And the man wrote The Great Escape.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
And that's a good one. I haven't watched that one in a while.
Yeah. Man, he knew his stuff.
He did.
You know, he had a little, James Clerval, talented man. Like, could go on a limb, make a controversial
statement. Yeah.
James Clerval, good writer.
Yeah, well, I've heard that the new Shogun television, was that on Hulu, I think?
I think so.
Yeah, I've heard that it's quite good, you know. So
okay.
I haven't
I'll
seen
add that to the list. Okay, me neither. So the sequel for Return of the Fly, all new cast and crew with the exception of Vincent Price. He would return in his role of Francois, and he would receive an expanded role, top billing, and a $25,000 appearance fee out of the $275,000 budget. Yeah. So 1/11. So he's getting paid.
Yeah.
Right there is what Price is doing. And kind of modern terms, I'm like, well, how much is that? Like in equivalent modern day terms, like that is about $250,000. So it almost feels like like before there was Nick Cage, there was Vincent Price.
Sure.
Like if you're doing like a B horror movie and you want someone to class it up a little bit and have a name and have someone they're never going to phone it in, but they're going to like deliver a performance.
Yeah.
You know, before there was Nick Cage in this type of role, like there was Vincent Price.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. Because and the thing is, like Nick Cage, he doesn't seem to really turn anything down either. He will appear in just about anything that puts money in his pocket, and he'll give you his best that he can in it.
Yeah, and like you said last time, like unlike like Cage kind of needs to do this because he, you know, would do things like, what if I bought a castle?
Right.
You know, and that I imagine is there's a lot of upkeep when it comes to, you know, things like that.
There's some lifestyle maintenance going on for sure.
Yes. You know, we got to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Where that you mentioned with Price last time, Price is like, what if I get married for the fourth time? Like this time it'll work. So maybe having to take on some of those roles to, you know, pay the other few wives off at that point.
Yeah, perhaps. He also had expensive tastes in art and wine, I'm sure.
Sure. So
he was
a man of good taste.
Yeah, he was.
And Price only signed on after reading the script. And even then, he would have like skirmishes with Burns on set about like the role and about his lines. And Burns would have like scenes of Price's trimmed back in order to kind of cut the runtime, which probably was the smart move here.
Yeah, I think so. He's not the core of this story. He's you know, he's the reason the movie gets greenlit, but he's not.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of Nick Cage, sort of maybe a little bit like Arcadian. I don't know if anyone's seen that. I like that movie.
Not yet.
But Cage, this isn't a spoiler, I don't think. Cage is sort of just in a little bit of it, and the focus is on the kids, and I think that's effective. But you know, he's the reason why the movie gets made. If he's in it, it's gonna get.
Well, same thing with Longlegs.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Probably in Longlegs for maybe 10 minutes of screen time, maybe that much altogether. Like he's not in it all that much.
Yeah,
and even like you could argue with Longlegs, it's really not about his character at all. It's really about Alicia Witt's character.
Yeah,
the push-pull with her and Micah Monroe. But like Cage is what gets eyeballs on the picture, interest in the picture, and the butts and seats.
Yep,
so
that's right.
Very much like a very similar thing. You could argue, like when you watching this, that like every scene with Cage, with Price, after he gets shot, like when he's like convalescing and he's speaking with the police captain, you could cut that right out of the movie and nothing would be missed. It almost would be better for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this really isn't. When I think of Vincent Price roles, this is not really what I think of as a Vincent Price role.
No.
Or in the first movie. And he's more integral to the plot, I guess, of the first movie. But I guess I'm thinking, when I think Vincent Price, I'm thinking, you know, Roderick Usher and the roles he did in the Corman Poe movies, and you know.
House on Haunted Hill, House of Wax,
Witchfinder General, you know, where he's pretty sadistic, and or like with Theater of Blood, I think is a good example of what I think of, where it's like he's a sadist and he's crazy, but he's also really funny. You know, that's kind of what I think of as sort of the quintessential Price kinds of roles, and he's just not really funny in these.
No, it's a very straight role.
Yeah.
It's a very, very straight-laced role.
Yeah.
So Fox, even though like Fox is not producing this film, they're just going to distribute it. They allowed it to be shot on their Westwood lot. So despite reverting from color to black and white, and despite cutting the budget by half, it still manages to look like a very solid picture.
Yeah.
Like the sets look impressive. I think it's filmed really well. It doesn't look as cheap as it could look. Like I think when we talk about The Curse of the Fly, which I haven't seen
it yet,
but
either.
Just reading some of the behind the scenes, you know, it was made for like $90,000.
Sure.
I think you're going to be really stretching those dollars out at that point.
Sure.
And It's going to be interesting to see how that looks in comparison.
Yeah.
And like Fox was like very hands off during the production of this movie, kind of like just make it, let us know when it's done, and we'll send it out. And this was released as part of a double bill with the Alligator People, and it still managed to turn a profit for Fox. Like not as much as the original Fly, but
that's
enough where they were happy with it.
At that time, there weren't the sequels that made more than the originals. There just weren't. No. You know,
I mean, I think with Jaws 2, they said if we make a third of what the original Jaws made, that's a success. Like we'll be happy with that
for sure.
And I think they made like 50 to 60% of the original, and they were like, "This is fantastic." Like now it's the opposite.
Yep.
Now it's almost like the second or third film is like the biggest one.
Yeah, like Deadpool 3. You know, with it's not exactly that title, but you know, but that's what Deadpool and Wolverine is Deadpool 3. So just didn't have that at the time.
No. Let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the movie. What do you think about the transition from color to black and white? I think we mentioned that a little bit.
Yeah.
Feels like it fits this kind of movie.
It does. And it's almost makes the first one feel weird to be in color. Because while I was rewatching the first movie, I thought this is a weird movie to be in color at the time. You know, I mean, obviously there were low budget movies in color. Invaders from Mars is a good example. That was a much lower budget movie than this, and it's in color, but it's in sort of a cheap color format, you know? Whereas the first Fly, it's like Technicolor. It's really nice looking and everything. But this just seems to fit the subject, fits the vibe, and it also, my favorite sort of underused format is the black and white CinemaScope movie. So it just makes it look super classy to me. Even if, you know, it's a movie about a guy with hamster hands and, you know, a giant guy with a ridiculous looking head on and, you know, an arm and a leg, you know, and all that stuff. It still kind of classes up the place a little bit. I mean, it's one of those movies. It's one of those formats. Every time I see a movie that's in black and white CinemaScope, I'm like, yes, this is exciting. You know,
excited. Like, it's like coming home.
Yeah,
it's like this is your comfort.
Well, I mean, I think about like the best ones that are shot in this format are like The Apartment. You know, Billy Wilder's The Apartment, which is a masterpiece, and another masterpiece, The Innocents, the Jack Clayton movie based on Turn of the Screw. Is phenomenal. It's one of the most beautiful films ever made. And it's that black and white CinemaScope full widescreen format. And there just are not that many movies made in that format. No. So it always kind of makes me perk up a little bit when it happens. So
I watched The Apartment for the first time earlier this spring.
Oh, yeah?
I went down a bit of I had never seen a Billy Wilder film.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up like doing half a dozen over the course of like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
The Apartment. Christmas movie?
I call it a holiday movie because it culminates. It is the perfect movie to watch leading up to midnight on New Year's Eve.
Okay.
Because that's where it ends. Is
okay. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Thinking of this year's like Christmas choice.
Yeah.
For Christmas Day, and I think Home Alone is in the lead right
All
now.
right.
I think that's like in the lead right now.
Yeah.
But I would love to talk The Apartment at some point. So maybe we do that for the patrons as a fun little project. But okay. First 10 minutes of this movie, kind of, it's like almost like a recap of the first film.
Sure.
Where, you know, you have it set at the funeral. Almost has like a very Son of Frankenstein feel to it. Like the way this film is structured, at least thematically, or at least for the first act, where it has that kind of Son of Frankenstein, the prodigal son is returning home. He's going back into the father's laboratory.
Yeah.
He's picking up the mantle of his father's work
Sure.
to kind of prove him right, to the degree that there is like the rainstorm that is like coming down during the funeral.
Right.
And Son of Frankenstein has, I think, one of like the best storms, like opening up that movie where it is just chucking buckets and the lightning that's coming down. You're almost replicating that here.
Yeah.
But it you get to the, through the monologue of Price's character, you get the recap of what's happened, and you find out like poor Helene, who at the end of the first movie seems like she's about to start a new life with Vincent Price, and I'd even said, like, does this seem to wrap up like a little bit too neatly? And then you get like she never actually was able to get over what happened to Andre at the end and like her role in it.
Yeah, I think that was it sort of retrieved the darkness of what should have been the ending of the first movie, because there's commentary about how she was institutionalized and released, which sort of is what happens at the end of the first movie, but I don't know. There's almost
she never leaves her bedroom.
Yeah, there's almost an implication that maybe she was like institutionalized again, even
after the fact.
Yeah, and so there's all it's just a darker opening, and in a really effective way. And I know it's a little cliche to have a funeral and a rainstorm in a movie, but it's a cliche because it works.
Because it looks good.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. You get a sense of the sort of mournfulness of the characters, and like I said, Price really looks like a Price character at the beginning of this. Standing under that umbrella, he looks imposing. They shoot him from a little bit of a below angle,
like a Dutch angle.
Yeah, and so you just kind of see this. I don't know. It sets up. It has sort of like a persona attached to it.
Yeah. Well, you get the feeling, the way things play out in the first 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
That everybody has been impacted by Andre's decisions and what he did in The Fly. Like that the, as much as we say, oh, this was like a quick cash grab, a quick turnaround time, it still feels like there's a lot of care that is put into it in terms of like, how do we continue the story of the first movie in a way that makes sense?
Yeah.
Even if we're only going to have one returning actor. And I know, Nicole had said when we recorded The Fly, Nicole pointed out that in the short story, Helene is institutionalized. Like she's not telling the story from, her warm bedside with a nice view out of the window while she's wearing her own clothes. Like, no, she's locked up in an institution. And at the end of the short story, like she commits suicide. Like she takes cyanide pills because she is so distraught over her role in Andre's death and, her complicity in it. Even though it's really a mercy kill, it's still a lot to take on. Yeah. You get the start of this movie and you have, Philippe is never known his father, and you can see it's wearing on him. Helene never really recovered from the death of like her beloved husband, and it like shook her to her core, and she could never quite get over it. And even the family fortune is now gone as well. Like Francois in the first movie, like Price's Francois says, like, we kind of have more money than we know what to do with. Like we can't spend it all, so we decided we'll become scientists and we'll invent shit for funsies. Like that's really, he doesn't say that. Like,
right.
It's not a direct quote because he just couldn't do that. But in this, he's like, he tells Philippe, like, I can't give you the money. I simply don't have it. Like the company has fallen on hard times. Like you get the sense that like Andre's experimentation with this and his subsequent like death, it's like the thing that from that point on, the sun never shone on this family again.
Right.
Like every day is this gray, rainy day.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think the Philippe character being grown now and taking on, I mean, they could have called this Son of the Fly. You know, and it would have been.
God, if it was the same kid from the first movie doing this role,
yeah. Well,
oh my God.
Well, I mean, and I think this is only made a year later, but obviously this takes place,
many years.
20 years later almost.
Yeah.
So there's even though it doesn't look like Price has aged a day. And it's like Friday the 13th. There's the continuity in there gets a little iffy.
When you get to 2, 3, and 4, yeah. It all takes place over
It's 5 years later,
weekend.
And it's a weekend, and yeah.
Yeah, except that Rob is like hunting Jason for his sister that disappeared in part 2.
2 days ago.
Even though that happened 2 days ago. He's out there hunting Jason down. Yeah. Well, that's exactly my point. Like, Paramount, when they're making the Friday the 13th movies, they're like, we don't care.
Yeah.
It's like man in a hockey mask with a machete.
Yeah.
Cutting down half-naked, attractive co-eds in the woods.
Yeah.
What else do you want?
Yeah, and it's the same. And you're saying it's the same idea here. I mean, there's not really continuity is not foremost on anyone's mind. I mean, it's more like let's just tell a story in this universe. There's almost a folkloric element to really a lot of horror franchises. This has come up before. I mean, we talked about that with Texas Chainsaw, for example. And so this, I mean, you have a continuing character or 2 continuing characters, but it's there's not too much concern about it having to tie in exactly to what happened in number 1. But yeah,
there's enough there.
Yeah,
I think the next picture it's going to be very different.
Yeah.
Like they basically say continuity schmontinuity.
Yeah,
and they
sure
throw wholesale elements out. Where here, at least there's nothing that's too contradictory.
Yeah.
Saying like the way that everyone's been affected, you look like A24 could look at this and be like, oh, like here's a blueprint. Like here's the trauma of what has happened to this character of Philippe. And, A24 is sitting there like, take notes, okay? Because we're going to milk this Formula Drive in the 2010s.
Sure.
We're going to like bilk that for all it can. What I appreciate about Philippe is that he's not a cookie cutter character. He's not the same kind of character as Andre. Like when you think of like Andre's character, like there's a warmth to that character. Like there's this great love between him and Helene. And he's someone that, unlike say Henry Frankenstein, where when Elizabeth would come to the lab and say like, it's time to come home. Like you need to come home and be around the people you love. Henry would be like, show her the door.
Yeah.
He couldn't get away from her fast enough. He was consumed by his work. Where Andre in the first film, he is the kind of guy that can go out for a night of the opera, a night of the ballet with his wife, and like take her on dates.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I guess, Philippe in this one is a little bit more of a typical mad scientist that we're used to. I mean, the hyper focus, he wants to prove his father, almost like avenge his father's reputation. And he's not keen on hurting anybody in the process, though. I mean, so there's not that sort of evil mad scientist thing, but there is a quality of obsession, I guess, still, which is we're very familiar with in this genre. So
he's single-minded in his pursuit.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and part of it too is like Philippe doesn't have the same attachments in life that his father had. Like his father had, Helene. His father had his son. Like he had Philippe. He had these things in life, and there was also like the affection between like Andre and Francois.
Yeah,
like the two brothers loved each other very much.
Yeah.
So he had all of these human attachments that would say, okay, well, like my work is important and I want to get this done, but like I don't need to be consumed by this work.
Sure.
Where Philippe doesn't have that, so he only sees like this is the work that I want to do, and I am going to achieve it by any means necessary. It almost hurts like in that scene early on to watch Philippe like blackmail Francois to say like, okay, well, and I love it's like, I want half of the company. I want my money right now. And, Price's line is like, your company's like a sack of apples. Like I can't just go out and say, here's your half.
Right.
Like that's not how it works. And Philippe is like, I'll sell my half. And Francois responds with like, you would destroy what has been in our family for like 100 years in your pursuit. And Philippe is like, yep, like as much as, and it's not doing it to hurt his uncle. It hurts him a little bit to say those words, but he's that determined.
Yeah. There's also a sense, I suppose, because he only had his father for a short time of his life, to create some sort of connection to him, I think, to try to reclaim that. And, there's also the sort of constant buzzing of the fly around, knowing, and I think there's the guilt that he probably lives with, that, if what my mother said is true, I could have saved my father if I had insisted to hold on to this little fly, and said, there's something really different about this. There's something special here, and we may not want to lose this. I don't know.
You're right. Like things could have played out much differently, as we see here. Like things could have played out in a much different way. And he also doesn't know. Like he has all of these questions about his father's death. The reporter confronts him and says, like, these are the facts as they were, and how come your mother was brought in and then released? Like, was it a murder? Was it suicide? Like, he has to grow up with all of these unanswered questions and all this, like, uncertainty. So we have that all going in. And it's Andre, Philippe is played by Brett Hazley, who is at 91, still kicking around.
Oh, wow.
And took roles all the way up until 2015.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Steadily took roles. Like not just like a 10-year or 20-year gap in the IMDb resume. Like when you look at his IMDb, there's over 150 credits.
Yeah.
And it was like 4 or 5 things a year every year for many, many years.
Sure.
A lot of TV work, a lot of B movies. Like not the guy that's going to lead a lot of roles. Like the best way I can describe him is he appeared on Dukes of Hazzard 3 times, and he played a different character each time.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's someone that you could say, steady hand, we know what we're going to get, but not so recognizable that the audience is going to go, wait a minute. Wasn't he the mechanic in season 2, episode 14?
Sure. Yeah.
Another show that did that a lot was
Murder, She Wrote. I was just going to say that. I've been listening to
Clu Gulager.
Yeah, Clu Gulager, and there's a character actress who was on an episode of The Office, who was on like 3 episodes of Murder, She Wrote, playing 3 different characters, from episode to episode. So,
really?
Yeah, I've been listening to the Office Ladies podcast, where it's, Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey from the show break down the episodes, and they do pretty good deep dives.
They do. I've listened to a few.
Yeah, and so
we get into it, and they're very pleasant.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun to listen to those. Just kind of a pleasant.
I thought you were going to say you found a good Murder, She Wrote.
No, I'm sure there is one.
Write that down so fast. I was going to.
I'm sorry. I wish I could say that.
If you ever want for funsies, especially the first few seasons, which we've watched. My wife and I watched. It's a comfort show. So many like horror character actors appear in Murder. I actually wrote an article for Dread Central, like listing a bunch of them.
That's
like
right.
Adrienne
I remember that
Barbeau
one. Yeah,
just like really like a fun. And then Leslie Nielsen turns up a bunch of times, including like Leslie Nielsen as like a Lothario, like sees Angela Lansbury and plants like a fat kiss on her 20 seconds after he's introduced, and the next cuts to another scene where like it's the next day and they're cooking each other breakfast, and is very much like, oh, they fucked.
Wow.
Like Angela Lansbury, Angela Lansbury, like she got a little piece of Frank Dresden. Right there. So very cool.
Oh, that's funny.
Again, this is what you get, folks,
when we're talking about Return of the Fly. We're both on for Curse next week too, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh my god, we'll be talking Ewoks. We'll be talking Jesus.
All right.
What do you think of the addition of Alan/Roland out as like kind of the out to steal Felipe's work? Like, what's your opinion of like this kind of?
Well, like I said, I really like a good villain, and this one's great because he starts out, like he's going to be just the humble, the assistant is like, oh, you don't need to pay me. It's going to be fine. I'm enjoying the food around here and stuff. And then he's stopping by the funeral parlor to talk with the gangster guy to say, hey, we can make a lot of money off of this. And so I was like, oh, it actually kind of caught me by surprise. It was like just before that scene, I was like, uh-oh, he's the bad guy, isn't he? And so it was just kind of fun to see that happen. And then, when he actually knowing the history of the matter disintegrator and all that, captures the fly and he's the one who actually, does these horrible things with the transporter. And it's, to a few people, and they really let him go all out, like stomping on the guinea pig with the human hands and everything. I mean, it's pretty nuts sometimes,
Yeah. You said your classic British mustache twirling villain.
Yeah.
Like he's got the cane. He's got the threatening tone. Like when he confronts Max and says like, oh yeah, like he lets him know like I've killed people before. Like if I have to kill you to protect myself and protect my identity, like don't think for a second I won't do that. Like I will cut you. I will cut you off from me like in a heartbeat. I'll do anything. I almost feel like the turn comes, again, it's only 82 minutes, but the turn comes a little bit too quickly.
Yeah. It's
like almost like 10, 15 minutes after his introduction, his score.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been interesting if they had been able to pull off where you don't really know he's the villain until he actually puts him into the booth or something of that nature, but I wasn't there to give him notes back when they were making the movie. So
I think like his introduction and his role in it, and like that interplay with Max, the mortician, who is, if not a straight up gangster, then like the intermediary, the person, like the guy, like Morgan Freeman's character Red in Shawshank. He's the guy that can get you things. Yeah. Like if you need a meeting set up with someone, like I'll get you that. Like he's the guy that knows the guy, basically. And he is full villain. Like the first Fly we talked, there is no real villain in that movie. It's just like tragic circumstances that have occurred.
Yeah, the circumstance is the villain in a way, whereas here it's it's just fun to have a character that you kind of love to hate. It's part of the fun of this movie.
Straight up evil.
Yeah. 100%.
And I don't remember if this was a part of the first movie, in that when they disintegrate the guinea pig, they decide we're just going to let him float into space.
Right.
And we'll come back tomorrow. Like, okay, it's like 8 o'clock tonight. Time to punch out. Like, this is a union job. So quitting time. We're not getting paid time and a half here.
Yeah.
We'll just come back in the morning and reestablish the guinea pig.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it seems like the teleporters. It's easier for me to call them teleporters. the matter disintegrator just seems like a mouthful or something. It doesn't really seem like that's really what it is anyway. And there's in the first one, he disintegrates the cat, and he's not able to reintegrate it.
It's just
it's just gone. It just floats off into the ether. And then here it's like that is part of the process. It's like whatever it is stays disintegrated for a while. And then it reintegrates over eventually. And it's another twist, another change from the original is it's big. It's bigger. I mean, the gigantism thing is just sort of like, okay, that's kind of random, but it seems like if anything, it would get smaller, not bigger. But it's just honestly, there's one reason why they do the whole gigantism thing is so they can because the fly head's huge, and you can just have a big guy chasing around people in a crazy head, so because monsters are big and they're not supposed to be human size.
But it's a little thing, and like you said, they do that in order to kind of introduce the fact that like the monster will be bigger. And it's one of those things, if you stop and think about it long enough, it's an existentially terrifying thing.
Sure. The
idea of, okay, your corporeal form is just floating out there in the ether. And it begs the question, where's our consciousness during that? Like, if you're the guinea pig, are you aware that something is amiss?
Sure.
Because they don't have the same kind of luck. Or if you're Felipe, or Philippe, if you're Philippe, and you're floating out there for that hour-long period that he was before they submerge him in again. Are you conscious and aware of what's going on?
Right.
Like, what makes us at that point?
Sure.
Like, where are our thoughts out there as well? And that's kind of a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Or at least one that keeps me up.
Sure. And that's kind of part of the question in the first movie, too. I mean, how much of his consciousness is the fly's and how much of it is his? And then, the part of him that's on the fly, the little fly, how much of his... Because by the end, he's screaming, "Help me," whereas before that, he's just buzzing like a fly, right? So sort of that transitional idea of, fighting against these things, and just the nature of consciousness, I think is a theme that you see extended between the two films.
And it's nothing they really explore.
No, they don't.
It's the kind of movie where they're like, they have no, it's not on the forefront of their mind. But when you watch it now, it's almost like, where does what makes us us, like, where does it actually live?
Right.
And where would that be, if you're trapped in between those two chambers, like, where is it? And how aware are you of what's going on at that point?
Sure. I mean, I've been obviously, I mean, I'm writing a lot about Frankenstein stuff, so there is that question that comes up in a lot of these movies, a lot of mad scientist movies, Frankenstein movies, having to do with what you said there. What makes us human? Is it the component parts, the physical component parts, or is there something more to that? Is there soul or mind or something like that is separate from that. And it's interesting. I mean, the Frankenstein films in particular that I'm writing about now really explore that a lot, like a surprising amount, because they're the ones that are actually the most based on Shelley's novel. And I think Shelley's novel kind of really has that as this deep underlying theme. So anyway, another little tangent
this
there,
idea
but
of
I think it applies.
No, but is the creature a new being in and of itself? Like you said, like, is it a whole new being, or is it like the singular consciousness that was like in the brain?
Exactly.
That now just has new parts that are stitched around.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know,
you're not really creating life, you're reanimating life.
Sure. And then, you know, Victor's decision in the novel to not complete the female creature because he's afraid that they will create a new lineage of artificial beings without souls, essentially. I mean, it's really philosophical stuff. I mean, this was radical stuff in 1818, and now we're just kind of like, you know, Hallmark movies.
Throwing it out there.
Hallmark movies are made based on it now.
Yep.
Not that there's anything wrong with Hallmark movies.
And that's, you know, it could be a good time as well.
Yeah.
So you get all of this with the guinea pig floating out there, and this idea that the matter can stay out there for an extended period, so that you get like the first real monstrous reveal of the film, like when Alan is caught, when he's cornered by the cop. And gets the best of him with some underhanded, unfair fighting tactics. When he puts him in the chamber, and the idea, I think, is to just get rid of the body, basically. And then when he brings it back in, and you see what's happened, like, that's a truly horrific moment. Like the guinea with the hand. It's not a great effect.
But something about it really got me, though. I didn't expect it. And because, I mean, the thing's really big, first of all, and then it's got these human hands on it that are just sort of flexing. And, I mean, you can tell it's an optical.
Hands.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you can tell it's an optical, you know, I mean, things don't match quite and things like that. But still, there's something that I find really more effective about that than if it had been some, like, obviously impossible at the time, but like a CGI effect, you know, with CGI created hands or something like that.
Well, again, I think it goes back to, like, it's tangible.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real guinea pig.
Yeah.
Those are real hands, and you're blending the elements together. And even though it's not quite, it's like not photorealistic, but it is. There's just enough of like tangential material there that it allows, like, we allow our imagination to connect the dots and maybe even recontextualize it a little bit, rather than just take what we're seeing on the screen at face value, which looks a little cheesy. We can like draw our own blanks on it at that point. And the idea of like a tiny guinea pig with full-size man hands, even though it shouldn't be scary, it's not like the guinea pig is all of a sudden evil. It is so unnatural that to disturb us. Yeah,
and you know, even he tries to step on it to kill it, and he can't even do it. And so he ends up sort of throwing, because just feeling the squish of that is too much for him. So he like throws something on top of it.
Because you hear it cry too. Yeah, that's the other thing. Not just that he's stepping on it, but it feels it and it's crying out in pain. Yeah. Which is really, but again, another smart detail from this movie is when he does that, when he drops the block on it to kill it, it creates it. You know, there's blood, and because there's blood there, he tries to clean it up, and later on, like, that is kind of what gives him away at the end. Like, they know, like, oh, something's happened here, so it's again, for a small B movie. Like, not something that's meant to take serious. It's just like nice little connective tissue, like nice little details that just elevate this just a little bit.
You know, and then, you know, the opposite of that effect is, of course, the cop with the paws of the guinea pig, which is, I don't know, both of them, even though they don't look 100% real, I find them both pretty effective.
They work. Yeah, I think it really works.
It really works. I mean, I think it's, you know, the same reason why I still love watching like stop motion as an effect, because, you know, watching stuff on RoboCop, even, you know, that's the 80s, you know, and you've got Ed 209 is a stop motion character, and you can tell that it is, but it's like, you still, I don't know, I still love that about it, and I wouldn't want it ever to be replaced, you know? So yeah.
No, I agree. I think all of that works in the pictures to the pictures benefit.
Yeah.
I think it actually helps it a little bit. I think the first 50 minutes of this movie are so quick and so much fun. Like it even posted on the Slack, like, hey, I think I actually enjoy this more than the first movie. It's really once Philippe is put in the chamber, like once the fly element is introduced, that's when things to me fall apart a little bit. I actually find that like a little bit less.
It's a little goofy.
Enjoyable.
Yeah, you know, it becomes, I guess, typical. It becomes sort of a typical monster movie at that point. You know, you imagine the cover, you know, would be the fly, the giant head holding, you know, a girl that doesn't appear in the movie, you know, on the poster, you know, that's sort of what it feels like. I don't know. I know it's not great looking, but I kind of like the fly head and hand in this one.
See, I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite.
I know.
Now there's...
I don't know what it is about it, because I know it looks really fake, and it looks like it's, you know, a big rubber head, you know.
It looks like a high school mascot.
It does. I'll give you that. But something about it, I don't know. I find it, I guess, endearing in a way. It's not scary in any sense, but I don't know. I just find it.
No, it is.
I just find it kind of funny, and I like the way it looks. Where there's some pathos in the first head, in the first movie. This one, there's none of that. It's just a big monster head. But I like the design of it for what it is.
There are at least 2 or 3 moments when whoever is underneath, like the fly costume, when they're trying to like run around in the woods or run through the street, that you can see them physically like touch their face in order to kind of like adjust the mask. Like it's like moving and they're like, oh shit. Like you can physically watch them like adjust the rubber head in real time. Where in the first, like, you know, I know these in the first film, they're like, oh, this is like trying to act with boxing gloves on. Like I was trying to, you know, like it was really cumbersome, but that is a lot more streamlined compared to this.
And it's more like a more modern prosthetic, because it was built up off his face. So whereas this is clearly like a head that's 12 sizes too big put on top of him.
It's the difference between having $500,000 and $250,000 to play with. Like that's where you're going to cut corners. Like you're not going to have the ability to do that. I know it's not Jack Pierce, but like that Jack Pierce style of like meticulous makeup. Like, nope, we're going to go big and bold and cheap. Now there is one excellent moment in the build up to that though, when Alan throws Philippe in the chamber. And his original idea is like, I'm just going to throw him in and have him disappear. Alan, like earlier on, like when Philippe thought Alan was his friend, he actually revealed to him why he was so terrified of flies, like what it meant to him, like why he feared them. And Alan hears the buzzing of the fly. And as that last kind of like twist of the knife, like captures it and puts the fly in the chamber with him, like kind of like dooming him to the same fate as his father.
Right.
Like knowing what's going to happen, which is so deliciously evil.
It really is.
And there's like the moment Philippe wakes up and knows what's going on and he hears the fly, it's only about a second, like a couple stills or a couple frames of film where like his eyes go big, he knows what's going to happen, and the look of pure horror on his face of what he's going to be subjected to is pretty terrific.
It really is. That's sort of like the last moment of the movie being like really fun, great. Yeah. I think my affection for the fly head in this probably comes from encountering it very young, you know?
Sure.
And so I'm fully willing to admit there's a nostalgia element for me related to that one. Yeah.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
Like totally
I used to
draw
it. You know, it would be like sitting in church, or I used to take paper with me to church and draw monsters when I was a kid.
Excellent. That's good use of time. I love that. Yeah. Well, I think to your point too, I think that when people think of The Fly, this is what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Like they're not thinking of that original prosthetic head. Like they're thinking of this giant rubber mask. Like that is the picture that comes to mind. And like that giant B-movie monster.
And this is the one that's sort of parodied, I think, a little bit by Joe Dante in Matinee. You know.
Yeah.
It's more like this.
I think the issue here is it's not just like the look of the fly, which you can kind of get around. It is what it is. I think like the difference between this and the original Fly is when Andre becomes the Fly in the original movie, there's the whole tragedy of him, of the folly of his way of thinking, of like he's this brilliant man who is done in by overlooking the smallest detail, by allowing this tiny thing, and that one tiny housefly it causes these ripples of destruction throughout his life and his loved ones' lives. And that he's not evil, but he's like trapped in this body. He's a monster. And he knows that like if this were to get out, it would ruin him, it would ruin his family, and it could be used for nefarious means. So there's that whole tragedy that plays here. Where this is just, there's a dude in a mask, and he's shuffling in the woods, and he's shuffling down the street.
And he's not even played by the same actor. You know, you have a big giant wrestler, I think, if I remember right, playing. I can't remember
Let's
who
see
it was.
if we can look that up right now.
And I think he was actually, the person who was actually cast had some physical ailments, so the person running around the woods even was someone else. So it's and I feel bad because I didn't prepare.
Joey Zabran.
Yeah, there you go.
Joey Zabran, born in 1917, had a few roles, died in 2004, played like the heavy in a lot of things. And his roles are like 1967, Custer of the West, played actor. Nanny and the Professor, television series, plays telephone man.
Yeah.
Club patron. Bit, uncredited. Clerk, uncredited. The machinist. Those are the kind of things that he, just guy in a mask, basically.
Yeah.
We think of like the stuntman in a mask type of deal.
Yeah, and you can tell, and this is a point I think that we find in much later films too. I mean, putting a stuntman in the costume, it kind of became the thing. I mean, that was, after Nick Castle in the first movie, you have Dick Warlock, and you've got stunt people playing that character after that, playing Michael Myers.
Richard Brooker
exactly,
playing Jason.
exactly.
Ted White playing
Ted
Jason.
White. Well, they tried to do it with Freddy for the second movie, and it did not work.
Didn't work.
Yeah, because it's
Kane Hodder. Yeah. And they tried doing a non-stuntman in part 2 for Jason, and that didn't work because he couldn't run, couldn't take the falls. He could not. He was not able to actually do the physicality of the role, so he had to be replaced.
Yeah.
I think there's in very little of it. But here it's just, guy they introduced the limp with it as well. There's almost like a hunchback quality to it. And there are questions that come up too, like, how does the Fly know who Max is?
There are all sorts of just like it's at this point ignore logic has gone out the window. Just so I guess it assumes that it still had. Oh, that's true because Philippe wouldn't know either, right?
Like there's never any sort of introduction between Alan, Max, and
right. That's
or Philippe. So how would he know who? Number one, who Max is, and number two, that he happens to work at this
funeral parlor. Yeah.
And
it's
like I said, the first 50 minutes of this movie, they're relatively tight.
Yeah.
They're not like a sloppy 50 minutes. And then you're like, okay, once we put the monster on screen, all anyone's going to care about is like big monster. He kills people, and there's even like when he kills Max, you hear like him break his neck, which is a great little sound effect. Like it's a pretty dark moment. It's pretty great.
I think it just comes down to the entertainment value in that last section. It's like, let's get the kids to want to come back and see so and so get theirs, right?
So it wraps up in pretty, kind of anticlimactic fashion where they find the Fly. It's almost comical, like the way they lead him back into the chamber. Like they kind of lead him back in. It's almost comical, to be quite honest. Like they almost like, we have to do this because like you're not going to be able to see how to get it. You're just going to bump into this over and over again, and you almost expect the head to get stuck when it's trying to go in. But like order is restored. The Fly is
one of the things
restored to its natural form.
Right, and I always thought to myself too. It's like, well, it just sort of randomly picks what parts to put on what, right? So how do we know that it's going to get it right? When you just put it back, is he going to have wings now? And
that would be amazing if at the end of this, like he has these huge fly wings,
right?
Or like he can't speak, he just buzzes when he tries to speak. Like do something, but no, it's just
that
like,
would have been
he and Cecile.
Okay, how great of an ending would that be? If he comes out, he looks normal, and he tries to speak, and it's just buzz. End credits.
End credit. That would be amazing. That would have been really daring. Yeah. It would have been a great stinger at the end of it. But no, it's just him and Cecile looking into one another's eyes as they, are going to, ride off into the sunset.
Well,
I don't know, man.
Hey, it's not a bad way to spend 80 minutes, though. No,
it's definitely not. And again, the first 50 minutes of this movie slap. Yeah. Like they're awesome. Yeah. It's really the monster stuff. It's like kind of the inverse of the first movie where you're like, all right, let's get to it. And then as soon as the Fly is introduced,
it becomes really interesting.
This is actually really interesting. This is like almost the inverse of it, where like all of the stuff with Alan and the kind of push and pull between like Philippe and Francois getting pulled back in to kind of continue his brother's work, and like you said, the giganticism, like this stuff is working, but it's not quite right. Like what's going on here, and the guinea pig with the crazy fucking human hands. Like, all of that is super interesting.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, let's undercut that and just like do it in a giant mask.
Yeah. Well,
Still
fun. And it's kind of what I want in a 50s sci-fi movie, like I said, you know.
Sure.
So I'm perfectly happy with seeing it, and I'm sure I'll watch it again because it's a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I would put this on again.
Yeah.
I could say I would definitely throw this on
Yeah.
again. All right, let's put this one to bed.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you got coming up, my man? Like, I know you've been working on your Frankenstein pieces.
Yeah.
Where else can we find some writing? Right
Sure.
now?
Well, I think I mentioned this last week, but it's officially live now is my piece for Gods and Monsters, which is my column at Bloody Disgusting on Them from 1954. This is, of course, 70th anniversary. A lot of good movies. Excellent. That hit its 70th birthday this year. And so that movie absolutely slaps. I was surprised at how much I liked it. Because like, oh, giant ants in the desert, that's fine. Mm-hmm. It's great. It is so much. It's so exciting, and so it kind of deals in all sorts of great stuff. Anyway, and the next Frankenstein piece, still working at it, so it'll probably be a little while before that one actually goes live. But if you're interested in that series, manorvellum.medium.com, and you can search Faces of Frankenstein or any of the pieces that I've written there. I'm now officially over 100 pieces published on Bloody Disgusting.
Wow.
Yeah, so things are moving right along. And kind of, I don't know how much I should say, but I'm right now working on a book proposal, so we'll see what happens there.
Throw it out there.
Yeah,
man.
so we'll see.
Manifest that into the world.
That's right.
Friend. Let's do that.
Yeah, so I'm really
Excellent.
wanting to make that happen. So, yeah.
And where can folks follow you on the socials?
You can find me pretty much on all of them at Brian Waves 42. So that's I don't really go on Blue Sky, but for Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, and Threads, it's all there. So,
okay. Well, listeners, you can make sure that you are rating, reviewing, and subscribing to us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure that you're doing that so you get every new episode right away. Leave us a 5-star review and a few kind words, because that does go a long way to new listeners finding us. So if you're listening to us, if you're a new listener, or if you're a long-time listener and I've never written a review, take it 2 minutes. Go to Apple right now and kind of 5 stars and a few short words about why you like us. Give us a 5-star rating on Spotify. Let us know what you thought of this episode. If you're listening on Spotify, at the end of or on every episode, you can be like, what did you think of it? You can actually just kind of review individual episodes. And we get a lot of really nice feedback from there. We get some really kind words there, which really I did not know that stuff was there. So it was kind of nice to go through and find some stuff. And then you occasionally get hey, I love the content, but sometimes the likes or the ums aren't edited out and it doesn't sound very professional. And I get that. I understand. Sure. And I try sometimes to do a good job of editing those. I will say just a reminder, we are not a professional podcast. Yeah. We are not the Kelsey brothers getting $100 million for the show. Right. We are a small group of friends, and I'm the one doing all the editing and posting and all that, and I got shit to do. Yeah. So we do our best to edit that out. I actually have a long-winded rant about how, unfortunately, I feel like podcasting has been tarnished by so many larger companies coming in and entering the space. What was once, when it was introduced, in almost a really like democratized platform where anyone's voice could be heard, that gets crowded out by, as much as I love Conan O'Brien, like Conan O'Brien doesn't need a podcast. Right. He doesn't. He doesn't need a whole team of people.
Sure.
Like, and I love Conan O'Brien, so it pains me to say that. But that's, a little rant, a little free rant for y'all. So you can leave me a 5-star review on that rant and what you thought of it right there as well. You'll get it all. You get the unfiltered opinions here from me. Go to podandthependulum.com where all of our episodes are located. You can go through over 250 episodes at this point, over 24 franchises to go through and listen to from start to finish, which again, for a small indie show, and most of us don't make it past 10 episodes, like to go for that long. It's a testament to my co-hosts that have gotten me through this and the listeners who have given us their feedback. So we really appreciate all of that. But go ahead and listen to the old episodes. There's a lot of really fun ones there. If you want more of us, go to patreon.com, Pod and the Pendulum. It's patreon.com, Pod and the Pendulum. And for a couple bucks, become a patron today. Get all the bonus content that's up there, up to 60 hours of bonus content right now that's up there. And we don't just cover horror there. Sometimes we'll do film noir, we'll do dramas. I think we did, my previous co-host and I, we did like Tim Burton's Batman. And the other day, my daughter came to me and said, I think I want to get into Batman. And I just clapped my hands and put my fingers together. And I'm like, let's go on a little journey together. And, I would love to cover every Batman movie at some point for the patrons. So if you give me enough support, we'll do that for y'all. Maybe. We'll see. All right. You can find me at Mike_Snoonian on Twitter. Same thing on Instagram. Same thing without the underscore on Bluesky. But really just follow me on Letterboxd, Mike Chump Change. Like if you want to know what I'm like go to Letterboxd, Mike Chump Change. Find me there. I'm not a huge social media guy. The more I post, the more annoying that I get. I just get super annoying. So I try to avoid it for my own well-being. But go to Letterboxd, find me there. Listen to my other show, Off the Hook, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre podcast, where Rebecca McCallum of Talking Hitchcock and myself, we just posted our episode 0, and we'll have new episodes up there shortly. We are looking at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 74 seconds of film at a time, and we are doing as deep as a dive as one can into the content of the movie, the political themes, the social themes, the where it stands in horror history, the literary themes. Rebecca is probably one of the smartest persons I know. So keeping up with her is like a challenge, but a really fun challenge. Sure. So we're going to be introducing new episodes of that every other week, to the degree that you will have about 100+ hours of content on one movie by the time this project ends, which, that's a crazy I feel, like I said before, Marilyn Burns at the end of this journey is how I'm going to feel. But we will be back next week with Curse of the Fly, and then we get to the real meat. Then we get to David Cronenberg's The Fly. Then we get to Eric Stoltz in The Fly 2, which I think will just be campy goodness. Not a great movie, but a great time at the movies.
I have an affection for it, I'll admit.
Yeah, and we'll go from there. Brian, thank you so much, my man.
Always great to be here.
It's always a fun night. All right, listeners, thank you. Have a great week. Hope you had a good Labor Day weekend. Summer's over. Spooky season, folks. It is the start of spooky season. Let's have a good one. We're out.